Hi, my name is Marcy Strumgren, and you've tuned in to Just the Facts. Art Johnston, former school board member, is in the studio with me today, and I'd like you all to welcome him. Thank you for coming in, Art.
Hey, Marcy, thanks. Always great to be here.
Good to see you again. Seems to me we've sat in the studio once or twice before in the past.
Yep, probably will be for a while yet.
And we're talking about the same thing, school districts. And first of all, I'd like you to tell the audience a little bit about yourself. You've got some good history that needs to be repeated, and how you're applying that to what you're doing now.
Sure. A little bit of history is that I'm a professional engineer licensed in quite a few states, and that's what I still work full-time as an engineer. I'm not talking today as an engineer. I got elected to the school board in Duluth twice, was on the school board for 8 years. And of course I always thought that, hey, I'm a professional engineer, I do a lot of construction, do a lot of design, do a lot of energy analysis, is what I do for a living. And I thought some of that would be kind of welcome. Of course, I wasn't too welcomed on the Duluth School Board. As you know, we don't want to get into the history of that. People can go back on your old programs and see or read any of my stuff, or go on my website, truthinDuluth.com. I have a lot of history of what happened on that. So I got an engineering degree from Michigan Tech, graduated summa cum laude. I also have a degree in mathematics from UWS over here. Graduated with high honors on that as well. And so I've been working as a professional engineer, and I had this, the silly idea to sometimes to make the world a better place. And so I had the great idea to run for school board, and as Jane, my wife, said, well, I supported you, but I know you're going to win. Well, hey, I did win. I won twice with the landslide, and of course, I wasn't too liked by the school board. And there was a couple lawsuits. Hey, we don't want to go into that. But what I've been doing now is that people know my history. I've had 2 successful lawsuits. Well, successful, that's always somewhat debatable what successful means. But I won, and you spend a lot of money when you win. But I had the biggest settlement for Minnesota Data Government Practices Act, willful violation by the Duluth schools.
And that was after you were out of office even.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And that just happened within the last 2
years. Last 2 years,
yeah.
I got that. And kind of the interesting thing about that is you do make settlements, and I wanted to keep going just to get legal precedents set, but it was pretty obvious there that, hey, I got the school. They did not admit any wrongdoing, of course. When you make settlements, everybody says, oh, they don't admit any wrongdoings.
Nobody does anything wrong anymore.
Yeah, but I could talk
Except
about the data
them.
practices.
Except them.
Except them. And nobody enforces things like Minnesota data practices or the open meeting law. Minnesota doesn't enforce that. And so the only way you can do that is to bring your own lawsuits. And of course, I was on the school board. And of course, I wanted to get information. Even as a school board member, it was very difficult, and sometimes I never got information that I needed as an elected official to actually do my job, to make decisions on budget, to make decisions on personnel, and you just don't get that. So anyway, I should have sued while I was a school board member because, hey, as an elected official, aren't I entitled, obligated? Isn't that good government to get information that I needed to be able to do my job, which was voting on budgets and personnel and policy and that? Well, it doesn't happen that way in Minnesota. So I went there and sued them after I got out. It would have been nice to have sued them before, because then I could have, what I wanted to do, Sean, I wish some other school board members across the state would do that. Now, people out there, school board member, is that it's not real clear that any school board member, any elected official that's in charge of government is entitled to any information that governmental body has. Obviously, we should be. Anybody would say that, well, you're a government, how can you make decisions if you're not given information? And, uh, and well, governments don't think that way. And when the Freedom of Information Act passed by the federal government, I believe when was that, 1966, it was fought very hard by the White House. It was Lyndon Johnson at the time. It took Congress quite a few years to get that even passed. And then eventually all the states came around. They have their own thing. Minnesota is called Minnesota Government Data Practices Act. So you'd think that people would know that when governments do something, people should be entitled to get that. Well, as we know, it doesn't do that. And of course, all they got to do is scare people off and say, "Oh, we'll give it to you. It's going to cost you $20,000." I mean, I was told that many times. Or they can say that, "Well, that's confidential information. We can't give that to you." And of course, as a school board member, I should have been able to get everything because some of the stuff, of course, is confidential personnel information. You don't want them to give out to people because that's violating privacy and sometimes. But as a government official, a decision maker, those kind of decisions we do make behind closed doors, and we should have been given that information. I rarely was. And so so I wanted to file it and show that any government official has a right to government data. Most people think, you're an elected person. Well, you are the government. What do you mean you don't have the data? Well, the people that are running governments are not the elected officials. It's the unelected bureaucrats. In this case, the superintendent, Bill Gronseth, they would not give me information. And then, of course, they backed it up with the school board. School boards are not there to actually do anything. They're there to do legal cover for the superintendent. That's how most school boards function, unfortunately. That's what we probably want to talk about. So again, I won those lawsuits. They did not put non-disclosure claims in on it. I did not. I said, I'm not going to do that. I settled for, I thought, a very modest, low amount of money. I got $55,000. I should have got $500,000 or $1 million because they had so many violations. And in Minnesota, if you have a willful violation, it's $15,000 per incident. Wow. So hey, I had 40 incidences where I had documentation. They admitted that. They didn't admit that it was willful, but it was clearly willful. Hey, you do 40 times 15,000, that's $600,000. That's what I should have got. I made a settlement, as you always do on legal stuff. But the president was never made that, hey, are elected officials also entitled to any and all government data? And of course, maybe confidential, but I should have been entitled to it. Well, the stuff I asked for was not confidential. It was just information like budget, information like what happened to the $12 million change order that was never approved by the school board, the Johnson controls. Those are things that I asked for the whole time and never got. Although I know what happened on that because I could eventually found out. But that was the stuff that I sued on, and of course they were guilty. The Minnesota Government Data Practices Office even sent letters to the school district. They still didn't respond. And to get any government to do anything, now they sent a letter, but they will not enforce it. All they do is send a little letter and said, gee, did you respond to this? You're supposed to respond to this. And of course, most government entities will just ignore that, as the school did here, as virtually probably every government in Minnesota does, because most citizens don't know how to do it. You have people that are extremely good at using government data practices. For example, John Ramos in Duluth, he's a master at getting information from government. And I wasn't as good. John came in with me several times to try to get information, and it was never forthcoming. So anyway, to go on to what we're talking about today, Marcy, is that because I have a lot of experience in this, both in the laws of the state of Minnesota as well as in school boards, that people ask me to go around and talk to them about whatever issue is going on. In most cases, it's about school buildings. Me being a professional engineer, I never go in and function as a professional engineer. I go in and make observations as a citizen, as somebody who knows construction, who knows buildings, and who knows the way school boards operate. So I'm in kind of demand when everybody finds out that, hey, this guy actually knows something. they call me up and say, hey, that's cool. The last one I was at was down in western Minnesota, Kensington. It's the West Central School District. They wanted to, Kensington's a little town. This is a bunch of little towns in west central Minnesota. Kensington, Hoffman, Elbow Lake, all these nice, beautiful part of the state. Um, and the school board, they've tried to pass referendums for, I think, 4 or 5 in the last 10 years. They just go after these towns, just time after time. They lose one referendum, they get another one. They keep going, and they just try to wear people down. And usually there's no justification. We're just like in Duluth, there was no justification for the red plan. All the predictions they made about saving money were completely false, and hey, we can talk about that. We've talked about that a lot. So we know all these predictions that governments, school boards, schools, not school boards, the school boards go along with it, make are always 90% wrong. And there's nobody to call them on. So who do they call up? Me. Hey, Mr. Professional Engineer. But again, I never go there as a professional engineer. I do not charge for my talking to them because I was in the system. I got ate up, but I spit this. They tried to stab a knife in my back, but it's someone writing. It was a rubber knife. I couldn't care less if they tried to stab me in the back with a rubber knife. I go and do the right thing. We have to have people that have courage to do the right thing. So people know that I will, 1, tell the truth. 2, I'm not afraid to tell the truth. I will tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And people know that about me, and they say, wow, hey, will you come and look at the project? They want to tear down our school in Kensington. They wanted to tear down this perfectly good school. It's a little town, I don't know, 300 people in the town, nice little rural community. I mean, it was a beautiful school. And we went there, and I'm looking at this, and somebody said, superintendent says, oh my gosh, there's a crack in the foundation. The school's going to fall down. Literally, is what he said. So I go in there and say, well, where is this crack in the foundation? The school's going to fall down. I looked down and said, huh? They're going to fall down.
Did you use a magnifying glass to see if you could find it?
No, I just had to look at no, it was there. I mean, hey, it's just, okay, there's always cracks. I can tell you a lot about cracks in concrete. I deal with that as a living. But, there's some things that don't make a difference, like a crack on a concrete wall doesn't make any difference. But they had just one litany after another. It's like they did in Duluth here. One lie, literally I'll say a lie. These consultants come in, and if it's not a lie, it's as close as you can get. Because these school boards, they come in, and the superintendents, I should say, the school administrators, the Minnesota Department of Education, they keep hiring consultants until they find somebody who will say what they want them to say. Same as Duluth here, the Duluth city government. Hey, it's like the library here. Hey, you can go on about it. The governments that are incompetent really have a problem. Because they don't know enough to be able to convince anybody of anything. So they hire a consultant, engineer like me, right? So when I go to these places, people know they're going to get the truth. They're not going to get a bunch of garbage. And I will tell them, hey, yeah, there is a crack in the wall, but, get your local construction firm. It's going to take them 3 days with an excavator. It's going to cost you $10,000 to fix a crack in the wall. Okay, $10,000 would be a lot for a homeowner, but for a school, it's a drop in the bucket. So you're going to tear down a school. They're going to build a new one for $20 million when it would have taken $10,000 to fix a crack in the wall. So that's the stuff that I do. And it's fun. I enjoy it. I do not, as I say again, I do not go there as a professional engineer. I go there as a citizen, a person that knows what's going on, knows how the system works, and that because normal people and most people like all of us, we used to trust our government, right? We grew up in social studies class or civics 101, and when we were in 8th grade or 9th grade, and we think that government tells the truth. Well, when it comes to things, technical things like, is this building going to fall down because of a crack? Well, you don't want to jeopardize your children's health, right, or their safety. And it's like, so they prey on this. They prey on the ignorance. I'm not saying ignorance in a bad name, but some people are not professional engineers like me, and they don't know, is this crack in the wall going to cause a building to fall down? They're kind of suspicious of that. but they can't go up and tell the superintendent or their consultant they paid, $100,000 for that. Oh, you don't know what you're talking about. So I come in and look at it and say, hey, fix it for $10,000. And, but anyway, the school, was issues like that all over. And the good thing about this, Marcy, is I was there about a month before the vote. The vote came, they had three things. One, they're going to tear down the school, build another one, build some other thing, and build some other thing. And they had three votes, as they do. And I can talk about how school boards are trained how to pass a referendum by the Minnesota School Board Association and the Minnesota Department of Education, totally ripping off everybody. So they voted 66% no on all three referendums. And this is a little town of Kensington. And so they are going to save their school. And of course, they're really worried about, well, wait a minute, this is the fourth or fifth one we've had in 10 years. They're getting really tired of the schools trying to tear down their school. The school, perfectly good school, of course it needs tender love and care. Of course there has to be done some work done on it. Like, doesn't your house need work? My house does. And hey, you got to pay for it. You got to paint the walls. You got to redo the flooring once in a while. You got to put a new roof on once in a while. You got to replace the HVAC system. I know you've done that in your house, Marcy. And so 66% of people said no. You know what percent of the people voted? 65% of the people in that little community got out to vote. I go into this town to talk to these people. I don't know any of these people. They call me and say, hey, you come down and talk to me. And I say, sure, where are you? So I go in, they gave me a tour of the thing. They put me up in a really nice, beautiful old town hall that had been renovated by a local citizen. And that's a beautiful place. And every house in that town had a Save Our School sign on, literally every house. I mean, there's not a lot of houses. It's only, 300 population town. And so I walk around I get up in the morning, go look at the stars, and walk around the cornfields and the soybean fields, and look at the town. And yeah, literally every house had a Save Our School sign on. And they wanted me to come in because they did not know, does this fall down? Is it a hazard to our children? I said, no, it's not a hazard to your children. Hey, spend $2 million and you can fix everything up on that's allegedly wrong. Because they had a consultant come in that's going to say it was going to cost $8 million. Then the superintendent said, well, it costs $8 million, and MDE says if it costs more than 50% of building new, we have to tear it down. Well, MDE doesn't say that. Nobody says that. First of all, it was a lie. It didn't cost $8 million. Secondly, MDE has never said if something costs so much, you got to tear it down. We heard that thing on the red plan here. Same broken record by these shyster engineers and lawyers and PR firms and superintendents. And so I'm kind of on the speaking circuit. I probably talked about 10 dozen schools around the state. And in almost all cases, we were successful at defeating these referendums. And so people look at me as the expert when it comes down to critiquing these so-called engineering firms, but incidentally, usually are not even engineers. They just put that on their name. But hey, they call themselves that because, hey, they get paid a bunch of money. The superintendent finds, oh, you're an engineering firm, okay. Well, they don't send their engineer. They send out their PR firms out there to do ideation. It's just such a scam, Marcy, it's such a scam. And anyway, so that's what I do. Now here, actually tonight, I'm going up to Hibbing. And they've already torn down all their schools and actually Rock Ridge. So hey, they're a little bit too late to save their schools up there. And these are historical, just like in Duluth, these are historical towns. And this is Iron Range. The first part of Minnesota was settled. Beautiful schools. They're trying to tear them down. Oh, I mean, they've already built new schools, and just like it happened in Duluth, their history and their communities are gone. You get, everybody says, well, gee, are you against the kids? You don't want to build a new school? No, I want to preserve some of my history. But anyway, that's too late to do that. So now people just want me to talk about how do school boards operate? Like we talked about already, too much time probably on how consultants work. We know how they work. We know how the superintendents manipulate the public, manipulate the parents and the taxpayers, and by using fear to try to get them to build a new school. And why do superintendents do this? I've been on several selection panels. Every superintendent, that sends in their resume to get picked by a thing, what's the number one thing they talk about? How many new schools they've built, how many new referendums they've passed. Do they talk about kids' education? Do they talk about kids' scores? Do they talk about the achievement gap? No. They talk about all the new buildings they've built, and that's what the superintendent, the Minnesota Association of School Administrators promotes, and that school boards think they have to have somebody who is good at manipulating the public and getting a PR firm who can snowball the public because the public doesn't know enough, like somebody like I do, who's a professional engineer. So anyway, up in Hibbing, we're just going to talk about how do school boards operate. And of course now, Marcy, as you probably know, I wish this would have happened 10 years ago, but you see around the country, there's a lot of parents that are really getting upset with the schools. And it's like, well, why wasn't this happened this 10 years ago?
Yeah,
I mean, remember when Lauren Martell was handcuffed, literally handcuffed by Tim Grover, who was a school board chair, by, who was that other shyster superintendent we had?
Dixon.
Dixon, yeah. And they actually, Lauren Martell, everybody knows Lauren Martell, he writes a column in the Reader, extremely good writer, extremely mild-mannered, very honest person.
Gentle-spirited person that would not
And
raise a
they called up
ruckus.
this police officer, and she handcuffed him and hauled him out of the room
Yeah,
for just talking at the school board.
within
It's
the
like,
3
huh?
minutes. Within the 3 minutes that
Yeah.
you're allotted.
Yeah, I mean, I think the police officer, well, she was a young officer. I think she was inexperienced. I think she realized it was a mistake later, but that should have caused every school board member and Keith Dixon to resign immediately. That's just what should have happened. That would have happened now. Was what happened. So here I'll summarize, Marcy, what's happened now, of course.
I would like you to stop for just a moment.
Okay, sorry, Marcy. I talk too much here. We got to have a little prompter thing up here. We don't have prompts here, Marcy. That's all.
Well,
we're not a good TED Talk people.
I need to stop you once in a while. Backing up a little bit, you have a statement here, and apparently this is what the MSBA has some policies on or some directives. One of your quotes here, I couldn't help but take notice when I was reading this. You, the board, need to be a cheerleader for the district. You need to show support as a team. Gail Gilman, Director of Board Development, you were told that. You were told that by the superintendent when you got elected to the board, as you quoted here earlier. So
Yeah.
you had already been smoothed to be a part of the team. Don't make waves, but that's not your personality. That's not the way you operate. And it certainly goes against your position on honesty. And so at least we had a cheerleader on our team that was trying to stop the red plan. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough of a team to stop what happened.
Right.
And I just want to bring to the public's attention for a minute. I took a trip up to the old Central High School, the one on top of the hill that's only 50 years old. Brand new ball fields, grown over with weeds. Tennis courts, growing up with weeds. The building boarded up finally after all the windows are broken. Then they spent how many hundreds of dollars on plywood?
Thousands of dollars.
What's that?
Thousands of dollars.
Thousands of dollars on plywood to board it all up. And recently there was a purchase, not only by the old Central High School, same one purchased both sites. And off of that site up on the hill, a portion of it that overlooks the lake, which is the most unbelievable views you can possibly imagine, unless you go up there and look at it. He's going to develop that. He's going to make more money off of his development than he paid the school district, I think, for both pieces of property, at least what Lauren Mattel had to say at one time. But your tax dollar went to nothing because that STC building, and Art can correct me on this if I'm wrong, we were still paying for it after it had been closed.
Well, yeah, I got
And so what a ripoff of the public. And then I'm up in Woodland getting gas last night, and the old Cobb School is a Montessori school now. The old Woodland Hills that we renovated for $2 or $3 million, a building down in the Lakeside area, Wester Park area, is closed now because Woodland Hills is defunct. But we renovated a building for them because the old Cobb School wasn't good enough for them. So we dumped money into that. And is that building closed? I'm going to run by there as soon as I get a chance. But we dumped money down black holes, folks. Where were you? And this is being done for your benefit. We need people to stop and think about how wasteful these school boards, city council, the state government, they're just wasting our money, but they have no real collective opposition. And that is one of the things that Art is trying to do, not only helping save districts from what we went through, but also getting a coalition of people together with certainly different skills and experience, and starting to hold these boards accountable.
Marcy, you got it absolutely right. I'm an environmentalist, not an old environmental. Well, I guess I am old, but hey, environmental background. I do a lot of carbon footprint analysis. If you take the Central High School up on the hill, I don't know how much that cost when it was built, but it was assessed when we were trying to sell it, and the school district refused to sell it. It was assessed for $26 million or something. But what happened? Lauren Martell talks about this a lot. They're going to take a wrecking ball of that. They're going to dig a hole. They're going to throw this whole building in a hole in the ground. Now, talk to me about how environmentally sound that is. It really bugs me that somebody put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. Taxpayers in Duluth paid a whole lot of money for these buildings, and they're gonna take a wrecking ball to them for no reason at all. There's nothing wrong with those schools at all, nothing. And they're gonna dig a hole and throw it in a hole in the ground. And it is really irritating to me because, hey, I don't like waste. Incidentally, concrete is the highest carbon footprint building material there is. So if you're worried about global warming, nobody's saying anything about that school up on the hill being torn down with a wrecking ball and thrown into a hole in the ground. I mean, to me, it's criminal. And the people talk about global warming. Why aren't they out there protesting the school district for taking all those carbon emissions that were put into building that building 50 years ago and doing nothing with it but throwing it in the ground and just doing a whole massive amount of more carbon emissions to build a new concrete building again? And it's like, okay, I mean, to me the hypocrisy is just unbelievable. Okay, we know buildings get torn down. Sometimes there's reasons for this. In this case, there's no reason to tear it down. And the hypocrisy of the liberal people, I'm saying that because I'm one of them, that didn't care anything about that carbon footprint of throwing that building in a hole in the ground. I mean, the hypocrisy to me is criminal. And I know it's not criminal to be hypocritical, but hey, it's still irritating. And another thing I want to say, Marcy, you brought up, which is, I think, a big thing here. You used to mention the Cobb schools there. We've had most of our other old schools, and I used to work in the Riverside School, the old Riverside School. At one time, people used to not tear down these buildings. They would probably put them into the community use. Well, no, that's not the case anymore, Marcy. And you know why that's not the case?
No, I don't really know the answer. Except that we've got a gold mine in our pockets, according to the school districts, and they don't really care about our
no, that's not it. They don't
programs.
care about the finance. The reason they are is that the teachers union, they do not want any old school to be used as another school. Remember, we were offered $14.2 million by Edison Charter Schools to build that. And we turned that down as a 4-3 vote on the board. I voted for it.
Selling it.
Harry Welty and Alana Oswald voted to sell it. Well, they didn't. And now the same thing happened up in Rock Ridge. Same thing happened up to the Rock Ridge up on the range, not the Rock Ridge over here on down the bottom of Hawk Ridge. But you know same was happening in Kensington. They wanted to tear down that school, and of course, well, why? Because the teachers union, I'll say the teachers union generically. Now we know I know a lot of teachers. I respect teachers. Teachers do a very good job. They have a tough job. I wish they would speak up more. But hey, welcome to America. Nobody dares speak up anymore. But they don't want competition. They don't want a charter school buying that. Remember, a charter school is a public school. It's not a private
Right.
school. It's a public
That's
school.
right.
They don't want a Montessori school to buy it like Cobb. It was a Montessori school. Well, I think it is a Montessori school.
It was Woodland Hills.
Woodland Hills.
Now it's a
right.
Montessori school.
Yeah. So they want all these old buildings to be tore down before anybody can reuse them as a school. And why is Old Central New Central being tore down? Because it is a building. It was designed as a school building, and nobody's going to take that school building and turn it into apartments because, hey, look at all the plumbing you got to do. Look at all the remaking walls. It's just not cost effective. The only thing these schools are good for is schools.
Schools.
And now remember, we paid a whole lot of taxpayers' money for that school. So what is wrong with giving that school to another public entity, which like a charter school system, to make a school out of it? That's all that building was good for. And said they're going to dig a hole and throw it in the ground. Again, but sorry, we went on that. So one of the things that I'm advocating, of course, today, and I've got lots, how do you fix school boards? One way you fix the school boards is you have to pass a law, and some states have, that requires any public school that is going to be closed for whatever reason, if it's because of the red plan or because there's a real reason, like, hey, everybody left the town, the economy collapsed, whatever, that school can be sold to another education entity. Doesn't matter if it's a Catholic school, if it's a Protestant school, a private school like Marshall, or a charter school like Harbor City or like Edison. So that's the first thing we got to do is, hey, change it so schools are mandated that they must sell to another public entity. And that's what should have happened, of course, in Duluth, is that we would have had a good school up there. We would have had educating our children. And why we didn't want that? Because the teachers union, not the teachers union totally went apoplectic about that and said, oh my God, you can't have that, it's going to be competition. Maybe they should think about being competitive themselves and start educating children rather than worrying about, hey, let's make sure there's no competition so we can do anything we want and be as incompetent as a school as we are. And Duluth schools are incompetent. Look at the graduation rates. Look at the achievement gap on kids of color. It is atrocious. The whole school board should be fired. The superintendent should be fired because they've failed our kids of color and many other kids. We have one of the lowest graduation rates in the state of Minnesota, and Minnesota has one of the lowest graduation rates in the country.
Oh, that right there ought to make parents get up in arms and try and do something about it.
Well, I'm hoping people are starting to finally wake up around the country, and I'm hoping people will continue. The reason they want me to come and speak up in Hibbing is that people are realizing, well, there's something funny going on here. We better start paying attention to our schools. And school boards in Minnesota I would say, are among the worst in the country as far as transparency and being open to parental input, taxpayer input. They do everything they can. They want to hide behind their little walls, and they're very good in the state of Minnesota. Doesn't do anything about it. The hiding behind, hey, we won't give you this information. And so people are starting to be up in arms. Is Minnesota going to do it? I hope so, because the school boards have to be They have to be called on the carpet because they're so out of control. School boards, what happened in Duluth here. And now remember, Marcy, sorry, I'm going to say this somewhat negatively about Duluth, but we had a school board election here, 2 weeks ago. You know what the percent of people in Duluth voted?
I know you told me. Go ahead and refresh me.
22%. How many people in Little Kensington, Minnesota voted on their thing? 66%.
6%.
And so there's other people around the country now they're realizing that, wait a minute, we have to pay attention to our school boards. That hasn't hit in Duluth yet. Everybody out there in TV land, pay attention to your school board. People have to do that, because if they don't, it's going to continue the way it is. The achievement gap is going to keep getting bigger in our town. The schools in Minnesota are going to continue failing too many children, and nobody's being held accountable. And nobody talks about it. They talk about, ooh, well, gee, anybody that talks about, say, critical race theory, you're a racist. That's a cover for the poor performance that these schools are doing on kids of color. And it is really amazing to me that there's people that will call, critical race theory, people criticizing the critical race theory as being promoted by our schools. Yes, it is. I don't want to talk about that too much. But the people that should be criticizing that the biggest are the community of color, because they're the ones, just look at our graduation rates in Duluth, Marcy. If you want to see a failure of a school, particularly on kids of color, it's the Duluth public school system. They're failing kids of color, and they should be called out on it. And obviously covering up by saying, oh, we're going to teach critical race theory. Sorry, folks, that didn't help any.
That's just a deflection from the actual issue and the problem.
It's a deflection, absolutely.
Yeah, and we'll go back to a board meeting that I was at, because some of you may have watched my videos on Just the Facts. But there were two teachers from Denfeld, my old alma mater. One was in science and the other was in mathematics, as I recall. And they clearly stated that the children coming to them, and that would have been, of course, from the western side of the city of Duluth. So we're talking Laura MacArthur and Lincoln, whatever they call Lincoln now, Lincoln Park, whatever.
Yeah, Lincoln Park Middle School.
Yeah, middle school. They had a 5th grade ability, 5th grade in 11th grade. And these teachers are saying, who had the guts to say something, there is no way we can bring these children to, our students, to a 11th grade ability. That gives us 1.5 years to really get them graduated. So when those students walk across the stage, your tax dollar has paid about $15,000 per student per year for what? A piece of paper when they can't even go out and get a job to read and write or go on to higher education. What is happening to those students? I'm talking to other business owners, because I am a business owner, and I ask them, are these kids prepared to get a job? Just even a simple job? No, they're not. Can you sit in your homes and be satisfied with that and keep forking over more money to a school district that isn't even performing? So we have more than one issue that needs to be dealt with here. And by talking to people like you're going to be doing again tonight and getting this up, we don't have a news media that has got any backbone to get in there and dig into the real issue of education. And now we've got all these problems with these. Then the students are the ones that are our future.
They're the ones that are missing out on
Yes.
that. And I'll quote one of my favorite columnists is Barry Weiss. She wasn't fired from the New York Times, but hey, she was a little too uppity for the New York Times, so she now has a Substack thing called Common Sense. And her latest article was, how did we get where we're at? We got here because of cowards that are running our government. Nobody that dares to tell the truth. And how do we get out of that? We get out of that by people having courage to speak up. And hey, I speak up. People ask me what's going on. I mean, everything you said, Marcy, I don't talk a lot about education. All I do is talk about the graduation rates. And remember, we're still in the middle of this COVID thing, right? You talk to any teacher, any parent. The last year, they didn't even send kids to school. And the preliminary test results that I've seen for this year, they're even worse than they were before. Obviously, I mean, the kids haven't even gone to school. And so, yeah, there has to be some accountability. The schools should be talking about something more important than critical race theory or transgenderism for whatever they're doing. They should be talking about education. Education is very important. Education is how we function. Intelligence, our ability for us to add numbers together, ability for us to write something, is the backbone of our democratic society. And people have to do that. Schools should not be social justice warriors while the kids can't even add numbers to go get a job. I mean, the schools have been failing, and we have to change that, because I'm here to change it. I want to make sure that my grandkids have a place to get an education, that they can be contributing citizens in our society. They can go out and get a job. They can be an engineer like me. They can be an accountant. They can be a doctor, and a good one. And you don't get to be a good doctor by talking about, by not believing in sex, for example. Hey, you want a doctor that doesn't even know what sex they are? Sorry, I mean, there's something that's really important, like biology. If you're a doctor, you have to know what biology is. You have to take biology 101. And Marcy, you and May, here we're going to sidetrack, may disagree on some of this stuff. I think sex education is very important in schools. We don't have that anymore. We're talking about gender. Sex education is like there's males and there's females. And that's what sex education would be. Believe it or not, Marcy.
Was when I was younger.
Schools are no longer talking about sex.
No.
They're talking about gender.
Yeah.
Oh, wait a minute, huh? What's going on? So, sorry to buy sidetracked.
Yeah, well, you're right, though. You're absolutely right. We had sex education when I went to school. You and I are not too many years apart. So, our sex education was actually that. Now, you're right. It's not any longer.
Yeah, no, it's just a bunch of garbage. But
it's a way to spend the time and not educate is really what it gets down to. So,
well, there's a reason why the Duluth schools have such a poor graduation rate. Why the achievement gap is so large in Duluth is because that's all the schools are concentrating on is that. They're not concentrating on educating their kids to be contributing members of our society. They're teaching them to, well, anyway.
It's social engineering. They're engineering, but it's a social engineering.
Yeah. Sorry, we're diverting, Marcy. Get us back on track here.
It doesn't really take a degree to do social engineering. So, anyway, I liked one of your quotes here. Horace Mann, the father of American public education. Education is our only political safety. Education, then, beyond all other devices of human origin, is a great equalizer of the conditions of men, the balance wheel of the social machinery.
Well, Marcy, that's why I am a strong promoter of public education, because our democracy depends on educated people. I think people like Horace Mann is considered the father of American education. Those quotes are important. And there's a quote I have from the Minnesota Constitution that says the same thing. The ability of a government to function depends on the intelligence of its people. And we don't see any of that intelligence being taught in our schools anymore. And so, yeah, we go back to that. That is really important. That's what schools are supposed to be doing. They should be making rational decisions. They shouldn't be tearing down schools and digging a hole and throwing them in without some kind of rational discussion going on that. No, there was never any rational decision making in Duluth on that. So when you look at these kids, they're going to say, well, gee, this is really kind of stupid. Well, that's what they're learning. our governments are making extremely poor decisions, and that's why I go around and I talk to people and try to tell them what's going on in the world, why this information is not correct, why this thing is irrational, why it makes no sense at all, why there's no engineering rationale on what they're being told by their superintendents. And so that, to me, what I'm doing fits exactly in education. We want schools to be rational. We want citizens to be rational decision makers. Doesn't mean we're not going to disagree on stuff. Yeah, we're going to disagree on a lot of stuff. Marcy, you and I disagree on a lot of stuff. Hey, that's cool. That's our society is based on disagreement. Our society is based on criticism of each other. That's how we get to be better. You've given a lot to me, Marcy. I hope I'm giving some to you over the years.
Oh, yes.
And that's what our society should be. It's not there to shut people down and saying, oh, if you're going to come to our school board meeting, we're going to handcuff you like Tim Grover did to Lauren Martell, or now that Arlen Garland, our new Attorney General for the federal government, wants to do to parents that go speak up at the school board meetings, and that's still incidentally going on by the FBI. It's like, huh? We want criticism. That's how we as a society change. We want change in our society. Environment changes. Social things change. Unfortunately, every once in a while we have things like wars and stuff that we have to deal with as a society. And we have to be open. We have to have people that have their thinking cap on, are not afraid to speak up. And one of the things I talk about here, Marcy, in my talk is, remember the Norman Rockwell painting about freedom of speech? Remember this guy sitting up there and everybody's looking at him, oh yes, oh it's so good you're speaking up and everything. You've seen the Norman Rockwell, everybody's seen it. Well, hey, that doesn't happen anymore. You cannot speak up. You're going to be told, the Civility Project, thanks to the Civility Project, you're told to shut up. If you're speaking up, you're going to be told to sit down and shut up. They went after me because I spoke up. And so I use that. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, the movie, Jimmy Stewart. I'm surprised that movie hasn't been banned on Netflix because it's showing somebody speaking up. Hey, you don't want anybody speaking up anymore in our country. And I worry about that, Marcy, because I want people to make rational decision making that's going to be good for our country. We want a good rational decision making in our schools so we can remove the achievement gap, so we can make sure that all citizens have an equal opportunity to excel in our society, independent of what their race is, what their gender is, I should say what their sex is, and what their class is. People should have an opportunity to move up in the world, to go to college, go to Harvard if they're qualified, and to get a doctor's degree, to get a lawyer's degree, get an engineering degree, or to stay at home and be a housewife and have babies. Those are really important things in our society. And everybody should be encouraged to do whatever they want to do. And not just, I shouldn't use doctors and lawyers, but we want people out there building our roads, running our cranes, being in police force, all those things. Everybody should be given, this is an important thing to do. Whatever you want to do, you can do it. And you can do that by having rational decision making, by having schools that give people the capabilities to be able to do all that kind of stuff. So, and sorry, I'm more rambling on, Marcy, but
don't be sorry. What you're saying is, what you are actually conveying is what people need to hear. They've been dumbed down for more years than I can recall, and I remember going through, and actually still got the presentation about school to work and all these kinds of different names that were coming from our federal government, which I don't believe education should be controlled by the federal government. I think it should be state and local, and it used to be. But people have been dumbed down. They don't realize that they're at that point, and so they do have this fear. They don't even know what the word cowardice means. They probably have never even heard it. But they've been turned into cowards, and they are afraid to speak out, and they need somebody like you, Art, who's willing to go out and talk about your experience, like you're sharing today, and give them some hope and encouragement to become a part of it. And if you get battered and bruised, pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and start all over again. And that's exactly what you did over the years. I watched it, I filmed it, and that's what we need, more people like yourself who are willing to help others at no expense to them, to say, this is what's happened to me. Don't let it happen in your community, but you are the ones that are going to have to be involved. I can't be here holding your hand 24/7. You now have got to take this information, do something with it, and get out there for the benefit of your community and your children.
Well, thank you, Marcy. You're more vocal than I am, and but I do appreciate the nice words, and yeah, it does vocalize kind of what I'm feeling. So thank you again. But this isn't about me, of course, and yeah, I'm
Right.
going to do my thing because, hey, that's who I am. I'm going to keep telling the truth as much as I can, and because it's for the betterment of everybody in our society. If you're black, if you're white, if you're male, if you're female, if you're upper class, or if you're came from lower class backgrounds, you have a right to be successful in whatever you happen to determine you want to do. So yeah, that's what I'm encouraging people to do, and also to have some determination of what their community is going to do too. It isn't just about us. Hey, I'm an engineer, whoopie-doo. But it's also what are you contributing to your community? When you see a school being torn down for no reason whatsoever and being thrown in a hole in the ground, you should be concerned about what your community is doing. You really should. And so not only am I saying that it's good for people to have their own self-determination, but also so they can contribute. You know, it isn't about us, Marcy. It's about our community, about our family, about our country, about our world. And so what can you give to when we want, I'm getting old, Marcy. I'm gonna die someday. We all are. Hey, yeah, I guess we're going to die someday, Marcy. What do we want to do? We want to leave the world a better place. And to me, that is not being everybody thinking like me, but that is somebody that can make good decisions as a society to be able to adapt to change that we're going to do caused by environmental changes, by political changes like war, by economic changes, all these kind of things. We want to make sure that our people in our society are able to do that. That means they have to think independently. That means they have to be able to put on that thinking cap. That means you have to be able to problem solve, and you don't take some easy solution by taking an excavator and digging a hole in the ground and throwing a $100 million school in it. That's stupid, Marcy.
It's going to cost us $2.1 million to dig that hole and put that stuff in there, and then what, $3 million to build a new building? We won't go there either, but in the last few minutes that we have, is there anything that you had put together in this presentation that you want to talk about for just a closing on this?
Well, some of my other observations on school boards, and you probably see in there, Marcy, is that you did the quote from the Minnesota School Board Association. This group contributes nothing to public schools, and one thing that I'm advocating is that Minnesota School Board Association be defunded. You probably don't know this, but the Minnesota, that Duluth Public Schools, you know how much they pay to MSBA every year?
No,
$20,000.
per school district?
No,
Or
it's
just
our
our
school district pays about $20,000. It's probably higher now. What do we get for it? You get somebody like you quoted that person saying that your only function as a school board is to be a cheerleader. Well, I don't have anything against cheerleaders. I want to make it real clear. I think cheerleaders are sometimes very athletic, and
They belong on the football or basketball
and
field.
they're really cool. But so I'm going to use the word cheerleader in somewhat a derogatory term, even though I shouldn't be. That you get elected to a school board. You don't get elected to be a cheerleader. You get elected to do something. You get elected to put on your thinking cap and to make a better world. You don't get elected to be a cheerleader. That's what Minnesota School Board Association should, and that organization should not cease to exist. And here we'll get political again on you, Marcy, but the head of that and is also one of the school board members in Austin, Minnesota, who are on the board of directors of the National School Board Association, who put out the infamous letters saying that FBI has to be called in to do something about parents that talk to school boards.
Oh.
And people have asked the Minnesota School Board Association, do you really agree with this? 25 states, last thing I heard, have either sent letters or saying, hey, we don't agree with this at all. Some of the state associations have dropped out of the Minnesota or the National School Board Association. Has Minnesota School Board Association said boo about it? Indications are that the head of the Minnesota School Board Association was part of drafting that letter. I mean, that's hearsay at this point, but there's been some talk about that. And there's legislators in Minnesota saying, hey, you guys actually believe that parents that speak to you in a school board meeting are domestic terrorists? And they haven't denied that. And so I think the Minnesota School Board Association has to be done away with. We need to get a group of people. When I talk to all these other schools around the state, everybody knows there's something amiss here. We have to do something in our society. And so I think that one of the things we could do for our school is get rid of the Minnesota School Board Association. I mean, it is a totally worthless organization that contributes nothing to children's education.
$20,000 would have gone a long way for some programs that didn't get paid for, especially in the western side of the school district. And at that, we just have a moment to thank the people for tuning in today. Not only just listen to what we are trying to tell you, but get involved. And if you need to find out more, what is your website again, Art?
Truth in Duluth.
Okay.
Truth in Duluth.
And and I understand you've got your website fixed now, and it's easier to get around.
I guess I didn't know. I really dislike social media, but I do have a website that I have, and I'm actually putting new stuff on. I'm probably going to talk about the Kensington thing. I added a new link to the famous City Pages thing about Michael David, one of the architects of the Red Plan, called Hook, Line, and Suckered, about how these people are ripping off communities in the state of Minnesota. That's the only place you can find that article anymore is on my website.
Okay, well, and this will be up on the YouTube channel, Just the Facts, in a few days. So you can do some research by going to Truth in Duluth and check out some of the information that Art's been putting on there. Thank you so much for coming in today, Art.
Great, Martha. It's always fun.
Good to have you here.
Yes, thank you.